And this is where Red Bull was brilliant. It took a problem and it turned it into power. What could have looked like rejection started to look like proof that the product was too unusual for the system, too different for the rules, maybe even too powerful to be treated like an ordinary drink. That kind of perception is marketing gold, especially with younger consumers who are naturally drawn to anything that feels restricted, controversial, or just out of reach. This is not just a story about a beverage company. It's a story about how hesitation created mystique, how delay created desire, and how bureaucracy may have done more to build the Red Bull legend than any early ad campaign ever could. Today, everyone knows Red Bull. It's one of the most recognizable drinks in the world. But in 1987, when Red Bull launched in Austria on April 1st, almost nobody in North America had heard of it. And what made it strange at the time was the product itself. This was not a normal cola. It was a slim canned carbonated drink built around caffeine, taurine, sugar, and stimulation. It felt more functional, more aggressive, and more purpose-built than the soft drinks most people were used to. Now, if you grew up in the 70s or 80s in the United States or Canada, you probably knew Jolt Cola, the high caffeine drink introduced in 1985 and marketed with all the sugar and twice the caffeine. Jolt Cola was an early North American version of the same basic idea. A drink sold on energy, wakefulness, and edge. But here is the difference. Jolt Cola was just a strong cola. Red Bull became something bigger because when Red Bull tried to enter Germany, one of Europe's biggest markets, it ran into bureaucracy and did not officially enter until 1994. German officials did not know exactly what kind of product it was. And that hesitation changed everything. Because while the bureaucracy had hesitated, the market started imagining. If officials were taking this long, people assumed that there had to be something unusual about it, something stronger, something controversial, something different. And that is really what this story is about. Red Bull may not have become legendary because of what is inside the can alone. It may have become legendary because German bureaucracy could not quickly decide what the can even was. Welcome back to the Lance Gregorchuk Podcast.
Great campaigns that sell? You're in the right place.
My argument is simple. The drink mattered, but the delay mattered more. Once German officials struggled to classify it, approve it, and place it inside an existing box, Red Bull stopped looking like a normal beverage and started looking like a phenomenon. And this is where Red Bull was brilliant. It took a problem and it turned it into power. What could have looked like rejection started to look like proof that the product was too unusual for the system, too different for the rules, maybe even too powerful to be treated like an ordinary drink. That kind of perception is marketing gold, especially with younger consumers who are naturally drawn to anything that feels restricted, controversial, or just out of reach. This is not just a story about a beverage company. It's a story about how hesitation created mystique, how delay created desire, and how bureaucracy may have done more to build the Red Bull legend than any early ad campaign ever could. To understand why this works so well, you have to go back to the beginning. The story starts in Thailand with a drink called Krating Diang, created by Chalu Yovita. I am definitely butchering that name, and I'm sorry for that. This was not originally some polished global lifestyle brand. It was practical. It was made for workers, truck drivers, and people putting in long hours who needed energy, focus, and the ability to keep going through the day. In other words, the original value of the drink was simple and functional. It solved real problems. It helped people keep moving. The Austrian businessman Dietrich Mateschitz discovered the drink while traveling in Asia. He saw the opportunity immediately, but he also understood something critical. This product could not simply be copied and dropped into Europe. In Thailand, it was practical. In Europe, it had to become aspirational. That's one of the biggest pivots in the entire story. The product's original purpose stayed the same, but the meaning around the product changed completely. Red Bull was no longer just going to be about staying awake at work. It was going to be about performance, ambition, nightlife, energy, and identity. Red Bull did not just import a drink. It imported a function and transformed it into a lifestyle. If you're enjoying the content so far, then please do me a solid and hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below. If you enjoy this kind of content, you do not want to miss my next video about Lululemon. As being a person from the Vancouver area, I know this brand very well. Back to Red Bull. That vision took shape when Red Bull GmbH was founded in 1984 by Dietrich Mateschitz and Chalio Uvidia. Over the next several years, the formula, branding, packaging, and positioning were adapted for the European market. Then on April 1st, 1987, Red Bull officially launched in Austria. And the company did not just launch a drink, it launched a signal. The slim can looked different. The carbonation made it feel different. The premium price made it feel different. Everything about it suggested that this was not supposed to be compared to an ordinary soda. This is where the genius really begins. Red Bull did not enter the market as just another soft drink trying to compete with the giants. It created a new category, the energy drink. And that is one of the biggest lessons in marketing. If you compete inside an existing category, you fight every day, everybody. But if you create a new category, you get to define the rules, shape the expectations, and become the reference point people use to understand the entire space. Red Bull did not try to beat Coca-Cola at being Coca-Cola. It built a category where it could be number one before anyone else even knew how to talk about the category. Now, this is where the story gets really interesting because one of Red Bull's smartest advantages was not planned, like a normal campaign ad. It came from delay, uncertainty, and the way the market reacted to something it did not fully understand. In many business stories, delay is weakness. It kills momentum. It creates doubt. It lets competitors get ahead. But in Red Bull's case, delay did the opposite. Delay created tension. Delay created intrigue. Delay made the product feel like something people were not supposed to fully access yet. Red Bull launched in Austria in 1987, but it did not officially launch in Germany until 1994. The gap matters. Germany was right next door. It shared the language, and it was too important a market to ignore. But Red Bull did not fit neatly into an existing beverage category that officials readily recognized. It was not a normal soft drink, not a sports drink, not a conventional health product. Ingredients like caffeine, taurine, glucuronolactone, and inositol added to the uncertainty at a time when energy drinks were still new and not cleanly defined. So when Germany took years to work out how to deal with the product, Red Bull gained something priceless, a reputation for being unusual, controversial, and maybe even too powerful for the system to handle. And that's the heart of my argument. Bureaucracy did not just slow Red Bull down. Bureaucracy gave Red Bull a myth. Red Bull did not just survive German bureaucracy, it turned German bureaucracy into proof that the product was different. And once consumers started reading delay as proof of power, the brand has already won something bigger than shelf space. It has won meaning. And that is the marketing breakthrough. When a bureaucrat hesitates, consumers often fill the silence with their own interpretation. People started talking about Red Bull before it was widely available. Rumors spread. People would say Germany would not approve Red Bull because this ingredient, because of that ingredient, because there had to be something unusual in it, or because it was somehow too strong for the system. Whether those claims were accurate or not, the effect was real. Bureaucracy created curiosity. Curiosity created conversation. Conversation created desire. And desire created demand. And of course, that kind of scarcity has a special pull on younger audiences. When teenagers think something is restricted, controversial, or hard to get, it becomes even more desirable. If you take something away from teenagers, they usually do not lose interest. They start trying to find ways to get it. Before Red Bull was officially available in Germany, it already had a reputation, and that is the genius of the whole thing. The brand managed to turn delay into demand and uncertainty into desire. There was also a schoolyard rumor around Red Bull that made the brand feel edgy and almost forbidden. Some of the chatter was vague, some of it was exaggerated, and some of it sounded like the kind of story that spreads precisely because nobody can verify it. But that is exactly the point. The important thing is not whether every rumor was true. In fact, they should not be repeated as facts. The marketing lesson is that when people think a product is being held back, restricted, or treated as unusual, the myth around it can grow faster than the reality. And once the brand becomes a myth, people stop judging it like a normal product. They start approaching it like a symbol. So the safest and clearest way to say this is Red Bull did not need every rumor to be true. The rumors themselves help make the brand feel rebellious, mysterious, and bigger than the can. In other words, Red Bull did not need every rumor to be true. The rumors themselves made the brand feel powerful. And that feeling mattered just as much as the drink inside the can. What makes Red Bull so important as a case study is that it moved from function to lifestyle. The original Thai drink was about energy and work. Red Bull in Europe became about energy for identity. It connected itself to nightlife, studying, sports, rebellion, performance, and extreme activities. It was no longer about just staying awake. It was about being the kind of person who does more than everyone else, pushes harder than everyone else, and lives at a different intensity. That's a very different kind of product story. It's no longer about what the drink does. It's about what drinking it says about you. Red Bull sold the feeling of being the person who does more. That is why it became bigger than the category it created. Then there is the slogan, Red Bull gives you wings. That line worked because it did not explain ingredients and it did not lecture people about caffeine levels. It sold a feeling, it sold movement, power, performance, escape from tiredness, and a sense of transformation. It described not the product itself, but the version of yourself you imagine after drinking it. That is why the slogan stuck. It was not literal, it was emotional. The slogan worked because it did not describe the product. It described the transformation, and transformation is always more compelling than information. Red Bull also refused to market itself like a traditional soda company. It did not focus on taste. Believe me, it did not try to be the cheapest option, and it did not try to be for everybody. Instead, Red Bull attached itself to a culture and eventually started building that culture through extreme sports: Formula One, motocross, snowboarding, skateboarding, cliff diving, music, nightlife, gaming, student culture, and high-performance lifestyles. And in many ways, it became a media company that happened to sell an energy drink. That is why the brand became so much bigger than the product itself. That is also why taste did not matter as much as people assume. A lot of consumers do not choose Red Bull because it tastes better than the other drink on the market. They choose it because of what it represents. The taste is recognizable, the can is recognizable, and the brand feeling is recognizable. In other words, the product experience is tied to identity. People are not just consuming a flavor, they're consuming a signal. Red Bull did not win because it was the best tasting drink. It won because it made energy into a lifestyle. And that is a much stronger competitive position than simply tasting good. If you break down the psychology, Red Bull won on multiple levels at once. Category creation, premium pricing, mystery, rebellion, identity, scarcity, and media ownership. It did not just sell a drink. It sold belonging, ambition, and a story people wanted to step into. That is why the brand was able to hit so many different audiences at once. Students saw focus, athletes saw performance, nightlife crowd saw energy. Teenagers saw rebellion. And all of them, in one way or another, saw the same thing, a brand that seemed bigger than the rules. And that leads to the big marketing lesson. Marketing is not just about explaining what a product does or what it is. Marketing is about creating meaning around a product. The drink itself may deliver caffeine and sugar, but the brand delivers identity, status, aspiration, and emotion. That is why this story matters. If you can make people feel that buying your product says something about who they are, then you're no longer just competing on function. You're competing on meaning. And meaning is much harder for competitors to copy. So my main thesis is this. Red Bull took a functional drink, rooted in Thailand, entered Europe with smart positioning, and then benefited enormously from the fact that German bureaucracy helped turn the product into a symbol of risk, performance, mystery, and ambition. The drink mattered, but the myth mattered more. So here is the question for you. Was Red Bull's victory really in the can, or was it in the delay? Was the winning force the drink itself, or was it the fact that German bureaucracy could not quickly define it, and in failing to, defined it and made it legendary? Because if that is true, then one of the greatest marketing advantages Red Bull ever had was not a slogan, not a billboard, and not even the formula. It was the fact that the system hesitated and consumers interpreted that hesitation as proof that this was something different. Red Bull did not become legendary because it was just another drink. It became legendary because it made people believe energy could have a brand, a lifestyle, and a pair of wings. And in my view, the real accelerator was not just what was inside the can. It was the fact that German bureaucracy helped surround the can with mystery. That mystery created conversation, desire, and that desire helped build one of the most powerful brands in modern consumer history.